Welcome to Find the Helpers. I'm Christian Campbell, and
And I'm Brad Bogus.
you can find us on YouTube and streaming on your favorite podcast app. Our clips are always available on your favorite social media scroll, too, whether that's TikTok or Reels. You can help us reach further by following us everywhere and sharing your favorite moments with those friends and family members you think most need to hear us. Confused and overwhelmed brothers, or that still MAGA uncle who's starting to show some regrets.
Fascism is creeping into America. We are seeing it and we're feeling it everywhere. And one of the telltale signs of fascism is its control of a media narrative. Now more than ever, I would argue independent journalism is a critical bastion to fighting against fascism here. And we have to use independent journalism to be able to shed light on things like the destructive policies that the MAGA contingency continues to wield against us, the disappearing of our neighbors via these illegal ICE raids, how everything is reshaping American life in general. There are stories to be told, and the major media is not telling them. They're not showing up in the places where policy has the most impact, but we do. Projects like Find the Helpers and These American Crossroads are a collaboration between us, real people, and Yellow Scene Magazine, Boulder County's only independent newsroom. You can become a sustaining supporter for just $8 a month at yellowscene.com. And thank you to all of you who have been watching the pod and also following Vince's journalism through These American Crossroads and have already supported via the fundraiser link, which we'll make sure we would drop into the show notes for you here today. So you can also become a supporter of what we are doing here and supporting independent journalism to fight fascism. Let's do it.
Today, we are joined by Dr. Aliki Barnstone. Aliki is a Greek and Jewish American poet and translator, was the State Poet Laureate of Missouri from 2016 to 2019. She co-edited with her father a book of women poets from Antiquity to now, which remains the most comprehensive anthology of international poetry in English. Has twice been a Fulbright Fellowship Scholar, won the Silver Pen Award from Nevada Writers Hall of Fame, and a Pennsylvania Council on the Arts Fellowship in Poetry. If we listed all of her accomplishments and accolades, we'd never hear her voice. So instead, let's get things started with Dr. Leakey.
Hi.
Hello. I hear
Hi,
it's a leaky barnstorm, not
Oh,
Barnstone.
yeah,
necessarily
Sorry
that
about
was
that. Yeah.
that
Barnstone.
was such a lovely moment. And it was especially lovely because that was one of the affectionate last names I got in high school. I had a great high school group of friends and we're still close. But anyway, yeah, I love the barnstorm. One of the aspects of the fascist movements is creating uh, a false narrative of what a nation is or what a people is, um, and it doesn't matter if it's Greece or the United States. So when I was in college, and I had very hip professors, aside from my Black poetry professor Michael S. Harper, to whom I owe so much. And I was a student in 1975, so you do the math. um he's still influencing me every day of my life.
Amazing.
And he assigned this incredible range of contemporary poets, poets we take for granted now, like Adrian Rich, or Robert Hayden, who was one of his close friends. None of these poets were anthologized, much less um, assigned in classes. So and again, I went to Brown. It was hip then, it's hip now. It might have been hipper then than now, I think. It
Maybe.
wasn't, it wasn't the, you read about Gwyneth Paltrow and, her son is at Brown, or daughter, whatever, um, her child. But I was assigned two books by women. I'm not, like Elizabeth Barrett Browning in a survey of English literature or something like that, but two books.
Right.
Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse and her A Room of One's Own, which in A Room of One's Own is really an essay, so a long essay. So there was a need. If you wanted to find, indigenous poets or or Black poets or Latino poets, there were no books. I mean, there were no anthologies
Right.
to go to. And so the reason I'm writing, well, first of all, content finds its form, but the urgency behind it has to do with, I want people to remember that we cannot take being able to read writers who are not, who are not canonized or approved by,
Yeah.
white supremacist patriarchy. Um,
Right. Right.
and 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 if you can't recognize yourself in a book, if all the protagonists are white men,
Right.
mostly white Christian men, because the opening of The Sun Also Rises is anti-Semitic right then and there. Like
Yeah.
T.S. Eliot wrote, incredibly horrible anti-Semitic poems. So we take a lot for granted. We take for granted that we could even read Jewish men.
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There was
Yeah.
this wasn't a book necessarily experience that I'm going to reflect on, but there was a moment I remember very clearly. I'll never forget when the movie Black Panther came out, which was a Marvel film, not a movie you expect to have much impact, but because people were able to see themselves reflected in this film in a way they've never seen themselves reflected before. I remember seeing this video of an elementary school and an all black school for the most part. And the kids were told that for field day, they were going to go to see Black Panther. And the entire room erupted in dance and song. Kids were dancing on tables. They were so excited. It meant so much to them just to see that reflection. It's so important. And you definitely
Yeah.
not something to take for granted. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, when I still remember reading To the Lighthouse and the two main characters are women. I hadn't read a book like that, except for, when I was a kid, I read Harriet the Spy, which is one of my very favorite books. And because uh, it's about a girl who wants to be a writer, and I was a child poet, so that was really cool to me. And also someone who had adventures and was spied on people.
Yeah.
But that's different than than the books you're assigned in in
Right.
high school and college.
Yeah. Your core
And
curriculum
and
being
there was
composed of
no
white
there
supremacy
there
and yeah.
no, I mean, and it the books are not available. I mean, one of the reasons we have all the Black writers we have is because of the Schomburg that preserved those writings by Black writers. But we take this, the work that went into putting this anthology together. It meant there was no internet. You went to the card catalog of the library, the
Yeah.
university library where I took 3 semesters off from college to work with my father in Bloomington, and advertisements, and in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Village Voice, which doesn't exist anymore, but we all read, uh, and various other magazines and newspapers and journals, and we also wrote to all the publishers, do you have any women writers on your list? Um, so
Yeah.
and then the second anthology was second edition, which came out in 1980. And it just so happened that the review in Time magazine was the same issue that had John Lennon on the cover the day the music died, which still chokes
Wow.
me up. And then the second edition came out in 92, and there was still so much work to be done, and so many discoveries to be made, so many important women poets to put forward in a book that mattered, because
Yeah.
that was the way you found found women poets. And I've heard so many stories about how that book changed young girls' lives because they recognized themselves in this international book of women poets that began with the first poet known, the first writer known to the world, Enheduanna, who was a Sumerian moon priestess.
I want to dive in a little bit here because I think this is, sort of we're about to get to the crux of why we really want to have this conversation with you here.
Yeah.
And the, for those who are not aware, this podcast is really about exploring, where we are in our current world as it relates to fascism. How do we resist it? How do we fight back against it? How do we find ways to help, like, not just in fighting against it, but also recognizing where we're at and letting people know where we're at? And when we were talking last week with Dr. David Charlo, who is a professor of Nazi fascism and European imperialism, one of the things that we talked about was not complying in advance. That he quoted he cited a story of how Max Planck, when all of the Jewish professors were being removed from the universities, that he said, "Well, we can't protest against this because tomorrow they'll just replace us with 150 willing Nazi scientists." And really the idea of protecting the job meant just comply in advance for Max Planck. And that was sort of a downfall for Germany. It was not necessarily a downfall for France. And so as it relates to, you've talked about curriculum, we've talked about like what stories are told and are allowed to be told or are provided to kids as they are getting their education all the way up through the university. I understand that, like, you have left Mizzou in an act of not complying in advance. And I'd really like to explore, sort of the reasons why that happened, what they did that caused you to decide to resign, and just tell us that story so that we can understand, the pressures that are being placed on people at the academic level right now in universities in our own country.
It hasn't been all of a sudden, it's been years of this, of the diminishment of academic freedom, of the surveillance, of, I don't remember having annual reviews when I taught at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, or anywhere else.
Mm,
I mean,
yeah.
that didn't exist. It was a non-thing. And then, then it's just like, turn in your CV. And then it's this My Vita thing and, basically just give your CV. And then it was, you have to write these essays. And then it was, you have to, okay, so this was one of the breaking points. This is like Defend an Institution, which is one of Timothy Snyder's 20 lessons from the 20th century, and Don't Obey in Advance. Okay. And these are very hard, simple, difficult ideas to square. So the president of the university dissolves the division of DEI, changes all the names of, the various offices that defend civil rights.
Yeah.
And this was in July of 2024, because otherwise, the University of Missouri is going to be defunded because we have a Republican legislature.
Yeah.
And so at the beginning of this, at the beginning of the semester, we're told what we can and cannot say, and that the website has been scrubbed of DEI. And then I have to do my annual review, which just I increasingly came to hate. And there's a mandatory question. This is a new mandatory question. Mizzou, inclusivity is the foundation of pedagogy at the University of Missouri, or something like that. And then you are to write an essay with these absurd categories, like if you don't know how to teach in a welcoming, engaging way, you do not belong in it as a teacher anywhere. right?
Right.
So how do you do these? And there are all these different categories. And do you need help? And do you need support in being inclusive? And I said, I was like, I have devoted my whole career to making the canon inclusive, and teaching in an inclusive manner. That is my mission. And I understand the reasons why. It was basically, you have a lot of goddamn gall,
Yeah.
asking me how you can support me, right? And
Right.
it just, and it was kind of going, all right, okay, now I stick around and I break my brains to write course descriptions where I write in code that that our readings will be diverse.
Dr. Leakey, I want to spend the second half of our episode really digging into, the what went down during the German occupation, Greek fascism, and how your parents escaped it. But first, we need to kick to one of our segments called Find the Helpers.
Yeah.
And Find the Helpers is really great because, sorry, let me rephrase that. We want to kick to our segment called
No,
the
it is
Helper
really
Highlight.
great. Uh-huh.
Thank you. We're going to kick to our segment called the Helpers Highlight. So one of the things that we like to do in our show is highlight one of the helpers that producer Vince has found during his journeys across the United States for these American crossroads. And he's basically crisscrossing all of the Midwest, finding great stories, finding great people like yourself, in fact, and attending these events to be able to highlight people who are actually actively resisting and actively fighting in their communities and helping to resist fascism from places you might not expect. So let's hear from producer Vince on this week's Helper Highlight.
Hey everyone, this week's Helper, Find the Helpers. I just wanted to talk real quick and remind everyone that being a political activist or being involved in the movement doesn't mean that you need to leave behind the human that you were or really change your skill set. Artists, engineers, scientists, teachers, everybody has the opportunity to create the conversation inside of the space that they currently exist inside of. And in a world where communication has never been more important and sharing stories has never been more important, having that conversation where you are is really one of the ways to be more helpful than anything. This week I want to highlight an artist from Boise, Idaho, who I had the opportunity to see his work premiere in Boulder, Colorado. A new play from playwright Bryce Edmonds, Join or Die. It's a really wonderful metaphor set in a dystopian future America, all about the arrival of fascism and the inevitable course that it takes if too many people comply in advance, seek safety and comfort inside of authoritarianism, and don't push back and reject that reality. For a couple of hours in a crowded theater, I was taken on an absolute ride through a pretty horrifying idea of what our future can look like. And then afterwards, for hours, both in the lobby and then afterwards in other spaces, the conversation continued, and I heard people talk about the way that it impacted them, impacted their call to action, impacted their need to get more involved, to learn a little bit more about American history, about imperialism, and about how we arrived at this moment in our collective contemporary history. And so I definitely want to shout out Bryce Edmonds this week and all of the artists who are internalizing and feeling this terrible moment and doing something with that emotion, sitting probably like a rock in the pit of their stomachs and creating something beautiful and tangible that gives everybody else the opportunity to process and to feel what's going on in this world, even if it's through metaphor instead of directly through reality. So yeah, all of the artists who are helping the movement, you really are, you are the people who are shining the light, leading the way, and keep helping. I do appreciate it. Let's get back to the boys.
While we're still raising funds via our fundraiser link, which you can find in the show notes, we also still have to pay the bills in other ways. So here's a great ad from Root for Hemp.
Root for Hemp is on a mission to put hemp in hands for everyday household and lifestyle needs, because we know that when you put hemp in hands, it opens minds. We are proud to support Find the Helpers Pod and These American Crossroads at Yellow Scene Magazine, because we know independent journalism is more important than ever. And that's why I became a sustaining member of this independent newsroom. Root for Hemp is here to educate folks on our over 12,000-year relationship with this plant, the detrimental racist history of Prohibition, and the bright future that's possible when we embrace our wonderweed. We invite you to visit rootforhemp.com and shop from over 25 affordable hemp products for your home and lifestyle. Just like this 100% hemp bandana available in mustard yellow. And when you give hemp gifts, you're joining our mission to put hemp in hands and open minds. For our friends at Yellow Scene, use the code YELLOW at checkout for 10% off. Shop today at rootforhemp.com.
Everybody, so use that discount code YELLOW at Root for Hemp. I, personally have been working as a marketing person in the cannabis industry and in the hemp industry, and I really love the promise hemp represents to the planet, to a lot of the things that we can replace on this planet that are very wasteful, that are destroying us and bringing climate change at a faster pace. And there's just some really cool stuff that you can find on that website. Highly suggest you check it out. I really like the napkins personally. We've cut paper towels out of our use of at our home by just using reusable napkins, like, we used to back in the day before convenience became the way of the world. So check it out and enjoy. So, Dr. Aliki, I want to get into the topic of the rise of fascism in Greece and then the German occupation of Greece. And, I want to start this by saying, probably like anyone here who is listening, I had no idea this even happened. Right. So when I learned World War II history, I learned all of the main highlights. Right. But what you said before the break about Hitler actually credits the Greeks for the reason why he lost the war. Boom. That's a fucking revelation to me. You know what I mean? Because I learned about in my research before this interview a little bit about how Metaxas, came to power. Some of the parallels that we learned a lot from Dr. David Charlo last week on, how fascism is really just far-right extremism and that it always arises in a sort of anti-socialism, anti-communist movement, which is exactly, from what I've seen, what I read, how Metaxas came to power in Greece. But then but it's kind of messy, right? Because he allies.
It's very messy because the communists in Greece were not good people either.
Right.
I mean,
yes.
They kidnapped the children to be indoctrinated in Bulgaria. That is not a nice thing to do.
Right.
And one of the interesting things about the Greek Civil War is in 2006, I was a Fulbright Fellow, and I wrote a poem in the voice of Eva Victoria Pereira, who is an imaginary poet, who was a Sephardic Jew from Thessaloniki and survived the Holocaust because her family had the wherewithal to get false Christian identities. Anyway,
wow.
So I wrote a poem that dealt with the Civil War, and I read it in Thessaloniki. And a professor came up to me actually and said, but first, and I read another poem about, how the destruction of the Jewish graveyard in Thessaloniki, which the Greeks collaborated with. And so first of all, I was told that didn't happen, that I need to read history. And secondly, I was told we don't talk about the Civil War. Which is like, this was 2006.
Because of the trauma that still exists in their memories, or because they just don't like the connotations
it doesn't
of what
sound
went
like
down?
when I was reading about it, it felt as if there's a lot of ugliness in these times in a country where people do things that are beyond the pale. I think people don't want to talk about it because they just don't want to admit that there are just that many people willing to do those things in a population. And it's kind of, there's a shame, a national shame about those things.
Right.
And I know, yeah.
And there's also the Greece as a nation is a recent is recent. I mean, the
Yeah.
revolution was in 1821, and one of the things about any nationalist movement is, and it doesn't matter whether it's far right or far left,
Right.
is the the way in which culture gets shrunk. So that happened in China, right? The Cultural Revolution, it had that
Yep.
name for a reason, but it's also, it's happening here. That we, so Greeks don't want to believe that Slavs are part of them, or that, or not all Greeks, not all Greeks. I
Sure.
just,
Right. Yeah.
but, or, that Turks and Greeks are basically siblings,
Right.
and that they share food and cultural traditions like this,
I think it's
so,
interesting that you brought up the Cultural Revolution because, for those who aren't aware, it involved publicly assassinating professors and, and basically attacking academia as a tip of the spear, right? And I don't know very much about that history, but I know that was critical, right? That was like upfront. We are attacking academia because academia is the source of the poison.
right,
Mhm.
right. And
Feels a little parallel, right? I mean, this is like
yes,
you're
yes,
saying this is
and
happening in Greece. We're seeing it happen in maybe in Mizzou in the
well,
United
it's
States
not,
in certain
yeah, I
places.
mean, it happened in Greece. I mean, one of, again, to get back to this Ohi Day thing, no day.
Yeah.
So, if you come from two peoples who have been genocided, you have to carry that on.
Mm,
And it's not just, it's not just Greeks and Jews, it's anyone. And that's why Black history is full of all kinds of ways of telling the story. Quilts, dance, music,
yeah.
emphasizing we got to learn how to read. um, and 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 so yes, what I realized was that I have been, I didn't realize this, but with respect to Mizzou was I have been told since I was a little child, never forget. My father told me, my bedtime stories were my Christian Greek family, not telling me how they survived.
Yeah.
There was a horrible famine imposed on the Greeks as retribution.
Right.
And so you say no. And one of the famous stories about my grandmother, my yaya, was she came from a very privileged, wealthy family in Istanbul, which, you get a little bit of instead of saying Constantinople. So I try to say both. But at any rate, they were refugees when my mother was 3 months old in 1924. They were deported. They had it easier because they came from a wealthy family. But before that, my grandfather, who actually came from very modest means, was a doctor. And when they were first married, they went to Vienna, she to study piano, and he was a captain in the Greek military and the head of the Greek Red Cross. And so he had a postdoc in Vienna. So the Germans come to take the food. And my grandmother says 9.
Mm,
And
Mhm.
and my mother is standing beside her saying, "Mama, they're gonna shoot us in the head." And she said, 9. I need this food to feed my children. She never would admit that she could actually speak any German at all, right? But she obviously spoke enough. And when I wrote my first Fulbright proposal. I sent it to one of my professors at Berkeley, and he wrote back, "This is an excellent proposal," but no one said no to the Germans. Right? So it, again, I'm not saying this in a nationalist or way. I'm saying that that the way I was raised was, you have a duty to say no. And I said no, because there was, there is shame in what Israel is doing in Jews' name. That is shame. That is despicable. And it is an affront to the memories of the 6 million. And I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
And,
I'm a Jew, and I completely agree with that.
And it shows the power of propaganda. And it's no accident, like as my privilege as a professor was continually eroded over, and it didn't start yesterday.
It's a boiled frog syndrome, right? They just turn it up little bit by little bit.
Yeah. And, but to get back to that thing about being a mandatory reporter, that was there supposedly to protect students who had been sexually assaulted, so that they could get help. And all right, so now there's no such office as Title IX anymore, because, defunding is coming, right?
Right.
And what are these offices there for anyway? Like, how do we know that we've gone from, this will be kept confidential and but this is the same state in which the legislature has been trying to monitor girls' periods.
Yeah.
So, okay, I've stuck around to protect my students, to give them sanctuary so they can speak, so that they can use their voices safe in a safe environment. And I have a trans student, and that trans student writes that they've been assaulted.
Yeah.
And then I am a mandatory reporter. And the other students have seen this because it's a workshop. And I don't know who they are. I don't know if they voted for Trump. I don't know if they're anti-trans. I don't know, if they're racists. Well, I have found out, so some of my students have been.
Sure.
So what do I do? How do you defend an institution and not obey in advance? You say, no, I'm not doing this anymore.
Do you feel like you're an outlier when it comes to the teaching staff at universities, or are you starting to see a trend of people also saying, I'm out, or no, or what? I just know anecdotally through the teachers that I speak to, have friends, and that ranges everywhere from middle school to high school to university, that they're challenged. One of the primary challenges is they're finding students difficult to teach right now, because the students coming out of COVID, coming out of social media, there's that challenge, but also they're finding that how they're allowed to teach is also being impeded. And so in your experience in Missouri particularly, are you finding that you're an outlier, or is this a trend?
I was the most senior person in my department. I have memories that my colleagues don't. I grew up with people who had found asylum at Indiana University, who had been tortured, who had been imprisoned. When I was at UNLV, my colleagues and I uh, had a freedom to write comments, and it was a city of asylum, and we had a writer who came and spoke. There was a Chinese writer, and I'm going to look it up, but anyway, he didn't know he was a dissident. He was just sent off to be re-educated. And he wrote his poetry and memoir on cigarette papers this big. I don't know how he wrote them, in teeny, 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 tiny Chinese characters.
Wow.
So I found myself saying, when I was objecting to having mandatory course goals, that this was a setup, that we were setting ourselves up. And then I found myself saying, I remember things you don't.
Yeah.
And that's a hard moment for me, because I have always trusted my colleagues. I have always believed I was among my people, no matter what the conflicts were, no matter what the arguments were. I always believed in this department more than any other. I still do. I still believe in my colleagues, because we it's not we anymore. There was a culture of we disagree to find our solutions for the common good, meaning the public good, meaning our students and academic freedom. I still think I have colleagues who are doing the good work. I have no doubt about it. But I could not do that. I could not find myself saying, I remember things you don't. I could not keep on explaining why mandatory course goals were incompatible with the academic freedom, why those were going to backfire on us. So if you have in your mandatory course goals that you're going to teach American literature in the historical context of gender, race, etc., and you can't put, and the website has been scrubbed of DI, do you not see that this is a setup? So the professor who needs to be gotten rid of, if you don't put the mandatory course goals, you haven't obeyed. And if you don't teach the thing that you're not allowed to teach, you're also effed. So this is pretty simple to me, because I grew up with people with numbers tattooed on their arms.
This reminds me of something that history is not linear, it's cyclical. And the cycle continues to repeat itself, because what happens is that those that remember pass on, and when they pass on, the stories pass with them often, unless they're written down. But even that goes away, and that's why they go after the books. But those stories to remind the next generation, you don't want to revisit the hells that we went through. That's what's important. And so having a generation, the last of a generation to die out, is basically telling you that what that generation went through will now be happening to the next generation, because there's no one there to say, don't do it. War is not glorious.
Well, there
Fascism,
will,
there's nothing pure, there's nothing
there
wonderful.
will be.
Right.
We will.
Yeah.
So I know Greece is a small country, and it doesn't matter to a lot of people, but it is instructive to kind of look at what happened from 1967 to 1974, when the military junta took over. And I lived under that.
My dad wrote a screenplay about that. Actually, he was fascinated. My dad's a big history guy, and wrote a screenplay which he was obsessed about when I was younger. I was like, "What are you writing, Dad?" He was like, oh, "I'm just learning so much about this era," and yeah. So
really, about
I
the
know
Greek
a little
military
about. Yeah,
the Greek,
yeah. He wrote He wrote a screenplay
Well,
about it. Yeah, and so
Well,
yeah.
it's
So
pretty, it's remarkable, really.
Mhm.
One of so one interesting thing is that the colonels who took over were German collaborators. They were Nazis. Imagine that.
Imagine that.
They
Take
came,
two.
what, take two, right? And they compiled a list of 10,000 people who were journalists, professors, musicians, poets, uh, you know, the list. We know what the list is.
Mhm.
And they took democracy, they ended democracy temporarily in 20
Mhm.
minutes. The tanks rolled in to Syntagma Square, Constitution Square, like, I don't know, 6:10 in the morning or something. I might have that wrong, but very early in the morning. And then they began arresting people and torturing them. And it was now illegal to meet in groups. Now, anyone who has been in the Mediterranean knows that, like, you know, there was a reason why the Italians had such a hard, I mean, the Greeks actually managed pretty well, but when COVID hit Italy, you have people who like to kiss each other, like to breathe the air together, and it's like this idea of personal space.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we want to be close together. Let's eat
Mhm.
together. You know,
Mhm.
the public square matters. Everywhere in Greece, and I'm in Italy or any of these these warm countries, and I mean that I'm not being nationalistic. I just want to be clear. It is against everything I believe in, but I'm just saying that we take for granted that we can gather in groups.
Mm.
So eroding that sense of outrage, don't obey in advance. The easiest way to get people not to obey in advance is to slowly but surely deprive them of their freedoms, and then all of a sudden deprive them of their freedoms.
Yeah. You boil the frog slowly and then axe comes down. I
History
mean, I
happens
think
slowly
that's
and then it happens really fast.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we learned this lesson with Dr. David Charlo about the rise of Nazi fascism. We've learned this lesson over and over and over again. We're seeing this lesson play out right now in DC, right? So we've got all of this. I mean, you call the last 10 years worth of boiled frog syndrome occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's been going on since at least Reagan in my lifetime, where they've been attacking the education, they've been attacking critical social structure systems, they've been attacking, funding for education, funding for the arts. And slowly but surely, you get people from a sense of outrage over something that they knew they should be outraged over to something they've just taken, like this is what we expect now. And then you roll the tanks through DC, and all of a sudden, we're maybe a day, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 20 minutes away from them saying anyone gathered in groups of 8 or more is considered treasonous, right?
I just want to push back a little. I mean, I'm not a Reagan fan,
Yeah.
but never was. But the thing I hated the most about him was the way he presented in that grandfatherly, consoling, lovely, charismatic voice. The way he repeated our values.
Mm-hmm.
The shining city on the hill, right? That I at one point I said, do you know where that came from? That idea of the city of the hill, city on the hill. And my students are going, what are you talking about? Okay. When Reagan said that, it meant something. I said, do you know where the idea of self-reliance came from? What's self-reliance? So, I would say self-reliance does not mean pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What it means is be true to thine own self.
Yeah.
what it means is, is whoso would be a man or woman or person would be a nonconformist. So that mythology of freedom, it did happen all of a sudden. I mean, yes, Reagan, but they spoke in code. Now they don't have to speak in code anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
and also Reagan is credited for "Make America Great Again," which is, as we learned last week, an almost direct translation of what Hitler said in making Germany great again. Although,
yeah. I mean, I'm not
slightly different translation.
I'm not, I mean, Nixon and Reagan were terrible, but they weren't this.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party was not this.
Right.
The Republican Party was not I mean, neither party was all good ever, right? But there were certain things that you could take for granted. Like Daniel Ellsberg did not go to prison for the rest of his life because the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the press.
Yeah.
That would not happen now.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. I mean, there are judges appointed by Trump who are dissenting. Yeah. Okay, so because it matters. I think it matters to make these distinctions and to hold two contradictory thoughts. And this is one of the things I told my students all the time. You need to hold two contradictory thoughts in your mind at the same time and try not to think completely dualistically. You have to think dualistically, but there are other modes of thought. There's either or, there's both and there's a lot in between. Okay. So Thomas Jefferson, he wrote the Liberation Document, which is the Declaration of Independence, from which all things freedom-oriented stem. So you cannot have what to the slave is the 4th of July. You can't have Frederick Douglass making demands that, all men are created equal means all men, and then eventually women. I mean, even Frederick Douglass couldn't quite get there,
Yeah, right.
Men first, then women, right? And I love Frederick Douglass, don't get me wrong, and I'm glad he's in the canon. He was not in the canon when I was in school, to be clear. So, so this is, it's there, and he enslaved people, including his own children.
Yeah.
He was having sex with his wife's sister. Okay, that's despicable. And yet, the man died on the 4th of July intentionally. And so I just want to say, Reagan, can you imagine Trump saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall? Like, come on.
No.
Can you imagine Reagan denying NATO funding and trying to break it up? Right. This is different in kind. This is not the slow boil. Yeah. And I think we need to make that distinction, that it matters that I could count on my students to be outraged in 2001, 2002, 2003. So,
I like to try to figure out, as best as we possibly can, how to leave somebody with something they can do, right? To like, okay, now we've learned the gravity of what we're talking about. Yeah, what do we do with that gravity, right? And I'm hearing be outraged, right? Like, I feel like, ratcheting up the sense of outrage is necessary, right? I don't know why
Yes.
they just threw a little
Yeah.
thumb
It's
bubble
also
up, but
important it's like Audre Lorde says that self-care is is an act of political warfare. So, um, I wrote this a little essay about Calomina, which means good month. And and when I was in Greece in 2015 when the banks closed, um, I didn't hear that on the first of the month. But there was this thing where I asked myself, like, given the crisis, is it okay? Like, do you say good month? Do you say Calomina? And the answer is yes, you do, because wishing people well every minute of the day for everything they do and every occasion, whether it's buying something and you say, may I enjoy it in health, or whether it's saying good morning, afternoon, good weekend, everything is, may it be good for you. Okay. But, and, you have to keep on celebrating. You have to keep dancing and singing and eating good food together. And here's the other thing about students. So COVID really harmed our children and their social development. And it put a lot of fear and anxiety into them at a developmental phase where they should have been out there kind of sneaking around. And, I remember my daughter and her friends walking around in all hours of the night in their PJs and camisoles. And I'm going, what are you doing? Like, you can't do that.
yeah.
Right. So a lot of them are afraid to be in-person classes. And not only because, of COVID, but because something happened. And they have a lot of anxiety. And I realized, like, I used to have these, long syllabi with everything. And that was helpful. Like, I didn't mean it as like, and so my students, I'd say, okay, here's an assignment, here are 10 steps. And I realized, like, 10 steps freaks them out. Dr. Barnstone, what do you want? I'm like, what do you want? And so, but it's also this. I'm reading this book, and believe it or not, it's hard for me to read books now because of this.
Yeah.
There's a book by Johann Hari called Stolen Focus: Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again.
I've read it. Yep.
Okay. So I tried in every way I could to get my students to go slow. You write one poem a week, you write one piece a week, great. You write one every 2 weeks, great. You read one poem for a week and get to know it deeply, great. That's better than reading 50 poems. No matter what you do, it's enough. And that is a radical thought. That's what we have to give to people. So you read on paper. Write on paper for 5 minutes a day. If you can't do that, do it for 1 minute a day. Just try it. I try. I can't do it yet. I do get together with my friends and try to write every day. I don't always manage. Get back to paper. Stop looking at the screen as much. And I have not solved the problem. It is going to take a lot of effort. Get out there, as Timothy Snyder says, be among people. Like, have fun. Go outside and breathe the air.
I think it's also too is that so much of the screens is about we're taking in information continually these days, but we're not putting anything out ourselves. And even writing on paper, and I have mine. I do believe in writing on paper. Is that small little ritual is good because it helps to rejigger the brain of creating as opposed to consuming. We are now
Right.
professional consumers. We're having thoughts about what we consume, but we've got to do the work ourselves, and that is the writing and the storytelling from our perspective, which then weaves into
Right.
what we're talking about. When fascism comes, it always goes for the storytellers first. The storytellers
Yes,
come in all forms:
100%. Right.
journalists, novelists, poets, all of them are storytellers. And because storytelling is the oldest and most efficient technology for human beings to transfer knowledge, wisdom, and news to one another in story form. And it is
Yeah.
the best form, and it still is to this day. You're going to remember something when it is told as a story as opposed to just a slew of facts. And so I think it's more important than any time right now in America to pick up your pen and start putting
And
your
there's
story
something
out,
that
not just
happens.
taking it in.
There's something that
Mhm,
happens with that. I just want to say that Johann Hari book,
mhm, mhm,
part of it is that we have so much access that
mhm.
over
Yep.
the last 130 years, that that the equivalent in 2007 of how much information we were bombarded with was like reading 174 84-page newspapers.
Mhm.
And the
Yep.
human brain is cognitively incapable of processing that. And so one of the rules I've made for myself with when I'm writing is write by hand. There's all sorts of
Mhm,
studies about how writing by hand
mhm,
increases creativity, increases your capacity to synthesize knowledge. Don't edit it yourself. Like I'm a good writer, and so I'll think of something and I'll think that's stupid. And I think write it down anyway because it might be the center of whatever you're writing. And I would tell that to my students. I would say, don't write about something, just go into the zone, see where you go. And writing by hand also includes doodling, like this little doodle here, that's good. Just doing that is good. You know,
Yeah.
the other trick is to try writing and drawing with your left hand, your non-dominant hand. See what
Mm.
happens with that.
I
Um,
can't even use my non-dominant hand to pick things up. It's so useless. I'm
you
gonna
can
have to
train
try that.
yourself. You can train yourself. But
Train
but
your
and
brain,
so
that's right.
yes, writing, just have, tactility. And the other thing about it is in terms of trauma, um, um, so one of the I have CPTSD. So one of the techniques is to like look, sort of, okay, use all of your senses and notice where you are in the present. And so that's one of the things that writing by hand can also do for you,
Yeah.
is just get you back in touch with what's there. And that's one of the problems with with young people, why they can't pay attention. You can't pay attention when you're in hyper alert. And I resent a lot of the terms. I came up with a new name for PTSD. It's not post because it's present. That's the problem, is
Mhm,
it's present. It's trauma, stress, disease, because it isn't a disorder, it's a disease. It's a degenerative disease like diabetes. And all you can do is find ways of mitigating some of the symptoms. But the other thing that happens with me is, because I'm such a perfectionist, is I have all the wisdom. How come I'm still getting symptoms?
Mhm.
The reason I'm still getting symptoms is it's a disease. It's a neurological disease. And now too many people have it. And so one of the things about telling stories is that if you just if you just if you don't process the story, if you just reiterate it, you're reinforcing the traumatic neural pathways. And that's why writing by hand is good. Because if you're telling the story, writing by hand, you're processing it.
Yeah.
You're healing yourself. You're never going to be completely healed. So the reason, professors, why, why can't my students follow directions? The reason they can't follow directions is because they've had their attention span stolen from them. And also because they're traumatized. They're afraid. Give them a reason to not be afraid. And that reason isn't reason, it's tactility.
Yeah. So listen, get outraged, right? You're probably a little exhausted and a little overwhelmed, and you don't have the capacity for outrage right now because you're oversensitized. So step one, put your hands on some paper, start writing some thoughts,
Or
start being
anything.
present, right?
Put your hands
Anything.
on
Meditation works for me. Yeah. Touch flowers, touch grass. I touched rock last week. That was a great experience, right?
Yeah.
Like reduce the amount of information, the amount of oversensitization that we're getting.
Yeah.
Give yourself capacity for outrage because we need it, right? We need it right now. Dr. Leakey, the last thing we like to do is just kind of like do our highs and lows for the week, kind of like let's check in on where we are feeling as humans, right? Because while we can have these conversations and jump into some of this stuff, we have to practice what we preach, right? Like let's actually process what we've gone through in the last week. So yeah, we like to talk about what was our high point, what was our low point. And I can start. My high point was I did get to touch rock, actually. My mom came in, spent some time with my son. And then my high point was taking him to school for the first day yesterday, which was really lovely. My low point of the day was it was also one of my high points of the week was spending time in community with Vince, getting to share dinner with him and talk with he and my wife afterwards. And coming to the realization that elections are likely to be canceled in 2026. Mm-hmm. That was like a giant boulder that just dropped into my stomach. And I was like, because he just threw it out there. It was like a casual conversation. We were just talking about what's going on, talking about DC. And he goes, when they suspend the elections in 2026, that's probably when we need to start worrying about X, Y, or Z. And I was like, he just threw that out there. Like that's something that we are going to expect. And you know a lot more about this than I do. So now I'm worried. So I'll say that was definitely my low point. How I'm going to process that low point is through meditation, maybe writing 100 shitty words down a day, whatever I need to do to process it and get it out.
They're just what they are.
Yeah. Not self-editing is really what I mean, right? Like I'm going to let it flow and then figure out how I'm going to apply my outrage to that situation. And apply my outrage to the things that are happening very currently in Texas. If you don't know, get up to speed on what's going on in the Texas legislature. So I'm mobilizing the people I know there, informing them, telling stories, right, doing whatever I can to get the word out so that they can show up in their moment of outrage. So yeah, those are my highs and lows for the week. Where are you at, Christian?
I was just over in London visiting my sister and my brother-in-law, and bringing my niece and nephew back there because they were over here in Canada for some cottage time. But while I was over there, I caught my brother-in-law on stage in Midsummer Night's Dream, currently on the West End.
Yes.
And what he played Oberon in it, and I was one of the standing audience right there, which became part of the play at a certain point. And I remember standing there, feet sore a bit, but thinking, this is civilization right now. This is storytelling, and it's a very difficult thing to repress this, because even in Midsummer Night's Dream, they'd made it political, and it was about the suppression of the sacred feminine and about patriarchy, and they were able to place that into this old show, and it reminded me of Russian theater and how it was able to rebel and still tell the stories even under sort of suppression of thought. And I think that was my high, is just, and also being in community with an audience, being together, I think being any kind of festival together, and there's a lot of talk about festivals these days in social media, and that's been jogging
That's
around in my
right.
mind as well. There's the importance of gathering people together larger than a classroom, as rebellion. And I think that theater and storytelling is still the best form of resistance. And I would say to anyone here that if you
Oh,
got
yeah.
any thoughts around you in your head, write those thoughts down, because you'll become a better storyteller at telling those thoughts next time you have a conversation with someone once you've written them down. And then that can be your small form of resistance. So storytell. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
The
What was your low
low,
point?
I don't know where to go with a low. I mean,
Just take your pick.
there's so much I need not go there.
Sure.
I think watching Trump just mentioning offhandedly that wouldn't it be good to have a war? That way we could just call off the elections in front of Zelensky. That was a low point, because he always says what he's thinking. You know, he always tells you what he's going to do, because he can't help himself. He's a messed up mind, and he's a personality disorder, and he tells you exactly what's going on and what he wants to do. So that to me was a low point, because I think saying what you're saying, Brad, yeah, they're going to make some situation. A war is always a way that fascists use, is that, listen, I see that there's something coming at from me domestically. Let's create an external threat to the country, and then I can do what I want internally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty scary
So,
stuff. Dr. Aliki,
yep.
what would you say are your high and low points for the last week?
Well, I have had a lot of high points. One of them was when when I got to cook for Vince, and he spent the night on Saturday. That was lovely. But I
Amazing.
also want to say, like, hugging my dog, who's a yellow lab, and just having the sweetness of being married to someone I completely trust, and have known more of my life than not. I feel very blessed to have that. And so my highs every day are just being able to hug Craig. And I would say that
So
is
sweet.
something, and and this is one of the high points. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. And it's, one of the things I wrote in my journal is, Craig is not the man of my dreams, because I couldn't have dreamed him up. And I'd say the same thing about this. Like, this is happier, is really high point. And I think in order to create community, we talk about creating community, and maybe we just kind of need to, part of that is, hugging your dog, which calms your nervous system down, or hugging the person, the people you love, just not eating together, not having not judging be kind to yourself, and be the person to yourself that you want to be to your child or your students, and just say, oh, that's beautiful that you just made that little squiggle. And of course it is beautiful. Like, or you are not only, beautiful to behold, but you're making beauty all the time with your love. So that's my, that's yeah. And I would say about the elections are unlikely to happen. I see that too, but we got to make sure it ain't so. I mean, in other words, the sense that we've got time, and there are people who are doing that.
We've got time to prevent it, but we don't have time to waste, right? Like, now is the time, but it's not a certainty. It's not a guarantee. We have ways to fight back. We just got to do it, right? That's what we're here to do.
I mean, I guess what I think about outrage is it's a good thing. It's like that, the anger iceberg, where there's this iceberg and beneath it are all these emotions. And in anger. Anger is a tool for authoritarian regimes, their anger and the anger they drum up with others. So I think that we don't want to get to the point where we are, in hyper alert. We're in fight or flight because we can't think clearly then.
Yeah.
Our sense of urgency is wisdom. And so and I mean, you know, that if you keep on with that, I mean, this is neurological. If your sense of outrage turns into this urgency, this frantic, you're going to get down to paralyzed and shut down.
Yeah.
And so look, that's the thing about the amount of news we are consuming. You know what's going on. You don't need every single thing. You don't need to know every single thing.
Yep. Yep.
And so pick and choose, you know.
Right.
And
don't allow them to distract you, because that is exactly the point. Stephen Bannon said, flood the zone. They are flooding the zone. This is exactly what they did in 2016 too, right? Like hit you with the most ridiculous shit all the time, left and right, distraction, to constantly keep you in a state
is a gift. Like, it's not a cover up, folks. It's reviving something that's settled. Don't talk about it. I talk about something else.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep. Dr. Aliki, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your story.
Really, yeah.
You know, I feel like we like Christian said, telling these stories and having other people tell their stories there is catharsis here, right? Like, we're talking heavy stuff, but I don't feel, like you just said, you're leaving this conversation feeling that this is a high for your week, right? Like, I feel the same. The more we discuss these things, while it may feel heavy, the more we actually can illuminate how we need to feel, what we need to be doing, how we need to act, coming up with ideas, clashing ideas against each other, holding contradictory ideas at the same time, right? We need to have the nuance and the texture of the world that we're dealing with, so that we know how to effectively combat the things that are trying to take away our freedoms. So,
may I say one more thing?
Sure thing.
About catharsis, what it means. It means cleansing, right? And so the theater at Epidaurus, which has like the most astonishing acoustics, like you can literally hear a pin drop from the top.
Wow.
And look it up. And so the god Asclepios was a healer. And so, as Christian was saying, the theater is cleansing. So when we and Asclepius, the gods killed Asclepios because he thought he was going to give humanity immortality, right? And so remember that, like, that this has been going on for a very long time, and there was even a demigod who like used the theater to heal people, and the people used the theater to heal themselves.
Yeah, and he was seen as a threat by the gods.
Yes.
That's how powerful theater is, folks.
It is.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and close out our... Yes, absolutely. And, you know, everybody follow Dr. Aliki's work. She's got books out there, so many we're going to have in the show notes for you to be able to find. But of course, you can just do a search for her and find her works. Definitely read a lot. She's done some important stuff there. And the anthologies in particular, like, you know, you've done humanity a service by putting those together. So definitely get your hands on some of those at your local library. Read on print, right? Like, enjoy it, touch the paper. Wanted to tell you about a couple upcoming events. The Yellow Scene Gala for Yellow Scene Magazine's 2025 25th anniversary. They're throwing the Carnival Gala fundraiser to support independent local journalism. And proceeds are going to help support Yellow Scene, with the vast majority of proceeds going to staff and operations and KGNU's longstanding award-winning journalism. So all contributions are tax deductible. Definitely help out. And if you are in Louisville, Colorado on October 16th, 2025 from 5 to 9 p.m., you can attend at the Louisville Underground. Additionally, you can check out producer Vince and Yellow Scene publisher Siobhan Blades on the Free Think Zone, which is a daily discussion show from Denver cultural leader Brother Jeff, whom I think we're going to be having on the show pretty soon. You need to know about Brother Jeff and the Cultural Center in Denver, one of the most important spaces for liberation and thought happening in Denver. And so Vince and Siobhan will be discussing the crisis in trustworthy independent media. Vince will be discussing at length early lessons learned and assumptions challenged while writing the first month of These American Crossroads. So you can find that episode online at facebook.com/jeff.fard, F-A-R-D. And just as an always reminder, make sure that you share, subscribe, like, follow, and continue the conversation and contribute at yellowscene.com. Can't tell you how much this helps us, guys. It's just a little button click here and there, a little thumbs up, a little smash of a bell. But it's what's going to help us get these stories told and, really illuminate the pathways we all need to be following if we are going to survive this current moment. So we appreciate your support, whether it's monetary or just a little thumbs up on our YouTube videos. All of it helps. So from Find the Helpers Pod, I am Brad Bogus.
And I am Christian Campbell.
And we will see you next week.
Find the Helpers Pod is a production for Yellow Scene Magazine. Our executive producer is Vince Chandler. Our hosts are Christian Campbell and Brad Bogus. And our music is by Mark Wilson X. Don't forget to share this episode.